Captain's log.
Captain's log. Captain's log.
Captain's log.
Captain's log.
Hey there. Welcome back to Factorio Space Exploration with your host, Captain Zisteau. Last episode, we created a giant nuclear power plant, which is also probably the most efficient nuclear power plant possible in Factorio, at least as far as I'm aware. It's currently providing 20 gigawatts of power, which gives us the freedom to use a lot of laser turrets to expand our territory. But more importantly, we now have the go-ahead to start building on this large landmass where we are going to make the Megabase. But before we start working on that, I thought we'd spend a few minutes comparing this nuclear power plant build to a few other builds and go over what makes it different and why is it efficient. And when I say efficient, I mean in terms of how much lag it generates. The thing that generates lag in nuclear power plants is heat, water, and steam traveling down pipes, and so we've tried to reduce the distance each of those has to travel. For the heat, we're using nuclear reactors instead of heat pipes. They're 5 times as big, so we use 5 times fewer heat pipes, and we only have to use 1 row at a time instead of doubling up or tripling up sometimes. For the water, we've built on the ocean, so we're using an offshore pump. It goes to a pipe to ground, and then a pipe, and that splits and goes to 3 heat exchangers, and then another pipe, and then 3 heat exchangers, and that is the distance it travels. It ends there, and that's actually a really short distance for the water to travel. For the steam, the actual ratio of heat exchangers to steam turbines is not 1 to 2. It's a little bit less than that, but we're using 1 to 2 so that we don't have to have any kind of intermediate pipe for the steam to travel down. It goes through these 2 turbines, and that's it. So here's a fairly typical nuclear power plant build I found on the Factorio Blueprints webpage. Is the first one that came up, so that's the one we're looking at. It appears to be built on the edge of some water because these are offshore pumps. The water travels down a fairly short distance of pipe, so that's pretty good to these heat exchangers. But then the steam travels down a really long distance of pipe to get to the turbines. And I'm a little bit skeptical if this amount of pipe can even handle the throughput without any pumps added, but there is a whole lot of pipes here distributing the steam. And they're also storing their steam in tanks, which gives the game more fluids to keep track of, which also generates even more lag. So they've got 440 pipes, 90 pipe to ground, and 50 tanks, and 200 heat pipes for 8 reactors. And here's my build. We've got a total of 200 heat pipes in the form of nuclear power plants, so that's the same, but we've got 36 reactors instead of 8, and we've only got 144 pipes and 96 pipe to ground. So that's way less. And here's one more. This is a nuclear power plant I designed for the mid-strap build some time ago. It delivers water from somewhere else via train. And then it goes into the tanks, and it's got to go through a series of pumps to maintain throughput, and then a direct line of heat exchangers, so that part is pretty good. And then the 1 to 2 heat exchanger to steam turbine, so that part is also pretty good. But due to the layout, I needed to make more or less a grid of heat pipes. The heat pipes and the water wouldn't extend vertically far enough, so we had to squeeze everything out into the sides, so nothing is going to tile. Unlike my design, which is infinitely tileable. The only limiting factor is the belt speed delivering the nuclear fuel cells. And we've got 745 heat pipes for 16 reactors, compared to only 200 heat pipes for 36 reactors. So this build, as far as I can tell, has the least amount of pipes possible for a nuclear power plant in Factorio, unless you can design one better. If you can, let me know. I would like to see it. Oh, by the way, if you're thinking you can remove this pipe and get rid of this gap and therefore have fewer pipes in the build, you can't. This spacing is more or less forced due to the fact that we're using the nuclear reactors as heat pipes. The nuclear reactors have 3 connection points on each side, and we are forced to use those 3. So without this gap, we wouldn't actually be distributing heat because they would not connect to one of the 3 heat connecting spots on the nuclear reactors. So this pipe, as far as I can tell, is totally necessary. Anyway, time to get to work. Last episode when we built that nuclear power plant, I ferried all the ingredients across the ocean by myself by emptying my inventory, picking stuff up, flying it over and dropping it off back and forth several times, and while that didn't take forever, it's definitely not the best way to do things. Ever since I started killing aliens to clear out all of this space, Starter Base has been generating supplies and making a massive stockpile of stuff to put over here to build the Megabase with. And I don't want to carry that back and forth anymore. We're going to automate it with a cargo rocket. So we're going to set up a landing pad. It just needs a name that we can send the contents of the cargo rocket to. Doesn't really matter what we call it. We'll just call it Starter Base Supply Drop, I guess. And then we will copy paste that a few times. We will need some power supply here, and we're going to dump those things into storage warehouses. So something like that, and then those are going to need to be in a network so that they don't flash and basically annoy me. So we'll do something like this. We've got 4 identical landing pads, so the same cargo rocket will go to any of the 4 that are empty, and we've got a whole bunch of storage for them. We're missing 1 container, but as it gets delivered via the cargo rocket, some robots will plop that back into place. We're going to filter out the cargo rocket sections. I'll just tell it to filter out 30, and those will get processed and compressed and sent into here, where we'll have to deal with them later, or send rockets somewhere else from here, maybe. I don't know. We'll also filter out the space capsules. They'll all end up in this one storage container. So that takes care of it on this end. And then back at the starter base, we're going to copy this build minus the requester chests. Just put it down here where there's some open space. And we're going to have to reshuffle, move some of these items around, but I don't have to move back and forth. So actually transferring the items from one container to another should be fairly quick and painless. We'll copy these requester chests down here. And then I guess we need a little bit of extra power. And we'll also need to extend a pipe down for the rocket fuel. So we'll do something like this, and then just stretch right up here. And we want to change the destination from artillery welcome package to the starter base supply drop. And there's currently 4 locations. It'll send it to any that are currently open. And the rocket is built, and it's filling up with stuff. It's a little bit disorganized, but it doesn't really matter because it's going to get dumped into storage chests on the other continent. We will sort through it later, or just not even bother. Just put down blueprints and let the robots deal with it. So there's the first delivery, and while that stuff is getting transferred, we've got a few things to do over here before we have all those items available to us. There's a whole bunch of trees and rocks on this continent, and I'm not particularly interested on clearing all of that by myself, or even with my own Roboport robots like this. So what we're going to do, we're going to make a blueprint that I can tile. We're going to put a grid of substations all across this part of the continent, and periodically add Roboports and some form of storage chest, and then we're just going to deconstruct the whole thing. And now for the main event. There is one last thing I think we are compelled to do. Gonna grab a requester warehouse, the big one. We're gonna request all of the wood. And behold, there it is! Due to some unknown anomaly in the space-time continuum, we seem to find here every known captain's log in the universe. Oh wait, what's that? There's too many of them. The gravity. They're collapsing in on themselves. It's gonna form a black hole. Oh no, what do we do? What do we do? Anyway, this entire area is now clear of debris. Before we start actually building though, here's a little flowchart thing I made to show the overall idea of the Megabase. Resources are going to come in on the outskirts of the base. If we can get them on this planet, they'll arrive via train. If we have to go to other planets, they'll arrive via cargo rocket. Then we'll do some basic item processing, things like turning ore into plates or refining oil into petroleum gas. We'll make some more complicated items, the different engines, the circuits. We'll also make modules, and we need to make all of the ground-based sciences to send those into space later. But before we send it into space, we still need to be making all the kinds of stuff we need to make more base. And so just before that, we will have an area to load all this stuff which previously has been entirely belt-based, into a logistics network. And then we'll bracket that area with some roboports, so we have a very confined, high-intensity space for the robots. Everything else is going to be belt and pipe-based, and then after that, everything gets sent into space that needs to go there. For the cargo rocket silos, we're going to keep it straightforward. We could do some complicated circuit network stuff, where we send signals from space, telling the rocket silo what we need in the moment. We load a rocket full of a variety of different things and send it to that one place. But it's not very visually intuitive what's going on when you have those complicated circuit network setups, and would also mean we'd have fewer cargo silos. So instead what we're going to do is have each cargo rocket silo be dedicated to a single material, and just like we've been doing with the artillery shells, our single rocket silo can launch to a variety of landing pads, which will make things very flexible up in space once we start building there. You can think of each rocket silo like a giant teleporting buffer chest. As long as the combined demands for all of our different locations in space we're sending the rocket to does not exceed the speed at which we load it here, then eventually the rocket will balance out and everything should be just fine, right? We'll also have some very basic wiring on each of the rocket silos just to make sure that it builds things properly and loads things properly. We have a signal to make sure there's only one space capsule in the rocket at any time, and we have a signal to make sure there is no more than 100 cargo rocket parts in the rocket at any one time. We also want to make sure that the rocket is able to build because it uses its inventory to shift the cargo rocket sections in the space capsule into this section over here. We don't want to build the rocket until these are in place. So we have a signal on these inserters here that says if the silo is sending cargo rocket equals 1, that means that the rocket is built and ready to go. Then the inserter will allow the payload to enter the silo. And we can add as many inserters as we please like this and just wire them all up to the silo. And it should load it in the same manner, whether we're loading 4 belts worth of stuff, 1 belt, 2 belt, 3 belts, whatever. So, this is the overall idea for how the base is going to work, how the items are going to flow, but this is not an actual base, this is just a diagram. Now we've got to break it into pieces. Here's every item we need to send into space. Each one of these needs to become their own build, they each need to work independent of each other, and then only later do we get to connect them together into an actual base. So stone and coal are pretty straightforward. They're just items we mine up and put on a belt. The stone bricks and the plastic are also pretty straightforward. We put some stone, and also we're going to use some vulcanite blocks as an alternate recipe to get more bang for our buck. Then we put coal and petroleum gas, and we get some plastic out on the other side. Those two are pretty easy. It's worth mentioning that there are no modules currently in any of these machines. That's because we're going to try to future-proof our base as much as possible. We currently only have 3 tiers of speed module and productivity module, but all these builds are designed with tier 7 in mind, which we're not going to have for some time. And we're also planning around having these wide area beacons, which we're not going to have for a little bit, but you might see gaps in the builds where we're going to put them. Next up, we got iron plates and copper plates. They are also pretty straightforward. We're going to need a lot of them though, so this build is a little bit bigger than the previous ones. Most of these furnace designs make use of vulcanite blocks to make the recipe a little bit more efficient. And oh boy, are we going to need a ton of vulcanite blocks. Next, we got steel plates. This one isn't as space efficient as it could be because I'm trying to do as much direct insertion as possible. Each furnace creating iron plates directly inserts into 3 furnaces creating steel plates. And then there's glass. We are crushing the stone into sand, and then we're smelting that into glass, again with some vulcanite blocks added in to make the recipe a little bit better. Next, we've got the first 2 modded ingredients, Cryonite and Vulcanite. These are both also pretty straightforward, but with a slight wrinkle to the production. We crush both ores in pulverizers and then wash them in these chemical plants. The Cryonite recycles some of the water, so we have a tank hooked up to a pump. If the recycled water has nowhere to go because the pipe backs up, then the whole thing is going to shut down, so we just make sure that we use up the recycled water before we bring in new water. For the Cryonite, it's mostly the same, except instead of recycling water, it generates steam, which we've got to convert back into water first. Next, we got this Vitamelange stuff, which is like really freaky space algae. We're going to have to convert it into all kinds of things, several of which we haven't even researched yet. Most basic thing we'll do is convert it into nuggets in these pulverizers, and sometimes we're going to have to cook it into some spice, and sometimes that spice needs to be converted in a chemical plant into extract. After that, we've got the first of our modded metal plates. We already had gray plates and orange plates, now we've got green, yellow, and pink plates. Beryllium is the simplest of the 3 modded rainbow plates. The right half of the build is very straightforward. We take beryllium hydroxide and then we convert it into ingots. We convert that into plates. A to B to C, very straightforward. The left side of the build is slightly more complicated. We crush the ore and then wash it in a chemical plant, but we're given one extra step from the Cryonite and the vulcanite block production lines, and this one even involves the Cryonite rods from the build we just went over. Crushed ore is turned into beryllium sulfate, and then once it's turned into powder, we have another item loop, this time water again, and we have another pump with the same kind of configuration, just making sure that we use up all of our recycled material before we inject fresh water into the system. Next, we've got the yellow plates, the iridium plates, which are quite a bit more complicated than the beryllium plates. The complicated part is in the middle, so we'll approach it from both directions. Iridium plates is made from iridium ingots, and the ingots are made from iridium powder and vulcanite blocks. To get the powder, we crush ore in pulverizers to get crushed ore. Then we wash it in chemical plants. And then the washed, crushed ore is sent to another chemical plant where it requires a reagent. So we've got to make these things, anion-ion exchange beads. And then here's where things get complicated. We've got a chemical plant processing our washed iridite and our exchange beads with a little bit of water, and we've got a random chance of 4 different outputs. We've got an output of sand, which we just want to get rid of and send somewhere else. We've got a chance to get the beads or the iridite back, which means we need to recycle those. If any one of these 4 outputs gets backed up, then the whole thing is going to shut down. And our 4th random output is the iridium powder, which we need to turn into ingots and the plates further down. And so each one of these machines has 2 buffer chests, one for each of the 2 items, and since it's between 2 machines, they each have their own buffer chest for one of those 2 items. We're reading the contents of those chests, and then we're inverting it with a signal inverter, and that gets combined with a static amount we're looking for in these chests. Then we've got a signal going to these filter inserters with the set filter option. So if at any point the amount in this buffer chest exceeds the amount in this constant combinator, then the filter inserter will stop allowing the item and we will instead use up the leftover recycled amount of thing in the buffer chest. And then we have the last of the rainbow plates, the pink plate, the Homium plate, which has a similar production chain to the iridite plate. After mining the ore, it gets crushed in a pulverizer, and then it gets washed in a chemical plant. We also get this icky stone byproduct we've got to get rid of. Like the iridite, the Homium plate requires a reagent to process, and so we've got to make this cation-ion exchange bead. Then the beads and the washed ore end up in some chemical plants down here, and we have a similar recycling situation going on where we're getting 50% Homium powder back, 50% cation-ion exchange beads back, 50% washed homonite back, or 25% sand back. The sand is a byproduct. We want to get rid of it. We're sending it somewhere else. But we've got to recycle the exchange beads and the washed homonite so that we can get all of the Homium powder, which will get turned into ingots and then plates further down. So we have the same buffer chest situation going on with a lot of little individual circuit networks. We're reading the contents of the chest, then that signal gets sent to an arithmetic combinator, and we invert the signal. That signal gets combined with a constant combinator, and so if there's ever more in the chest than are listed here, that number goes negative, and we'll disable the filter on these filter inserters, which are set to set filter. And in that way, we make sure we use up the recycled items before we put new items into the machine. So we always have space for the powder, which is the output that we are looking for. We always have space for that to exit the machine. And then after that, it's pretty straightforward. The powder gets sent to an industrial furnace. It gets turned into an ingot. The ingot gets turned into a plate, and then we put that plate on a belt. Anyway, there are some of the pieces of the puzzle that is going to be our Megabase. Next episode, we're going to actually build the dang thing. Oh wait, I forgot. We need to make science. How could I ever forget about that? Here's the module for the ground-based science stuff. You put the stuff in the machines and other crap pops out. You put the crap in the science machines and the science pops out. You send the science to space, yada 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 yada. You get the idea. It's a pretty easy game, not too complicated, pretty straightforward. So anyway, I think that about wraps up the episode. Oh my god, I can't believe I forgot. We also need a crap load of circuits, and we're gonna need some modules. Real quick, let's build that. And you know what? There's still actually a few modules left to place, and we've got to put down all of the train stations on the outskirts, and we haven't put down any of the rocket silos. Man, this continent's gonna fill up quick, but I think that about does it for the episode. That's it. That's the end of the episode. Next episode, we're gonna build the Megabase. Yep. Okay, that's it. Goodbye.